It was a quiet afternoon, the kind that makes every sound in the house echo a little louder. The clock ticked slowly on the wall, and the soft drizzle outside tapped gently against the windowpanes. Clara sat by herself on the couch, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. The house was clean, the television off, the air still. It had been like this for weeks, silent, orderly, and utterly lonely. Her husband, Daniel, had left early that morning, as always. He worked long hours at an engineering firm and usually returned late at night, exhausted, half listening to her stories before falling asleep on the sofa. They didn't fight. They didn't argue. But that was the problem, they didn't talk either. Their marriage had become a routine, a pattern of polite exchanges and quiet dinners where the clinking of cutlery was louder than their words. Clara sometimes wondered if he noticed how much she missed him, or if he was too tired to care. That afternoon, the kitchen faucet began to drip again. The sound, drop after drop, was oddly irritating, like a reminder that something inside her was leaking too, something she had ignored for far too long. She opened her phone and searched for a plumber nearby. It wasn't urgent, but she wanted something, anything, to break the monotony of her day. Without thinking much, she booked the first name she SAW. An hour later, the doorbell rang. Clara brushed her hair quickly and opened the door. Standing there was a young man, tall, dark-skinned, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He couldn't have been more than 21. He introduced himself politely. "I'm Eli, ma'am. You called for a plumbing issue?" For a moment, Clara froze. She hadn't expected someone so young. "Oh, yes, right," she said quickly. "The kitchen sink, it's leaking again." Eli nodded, stepping inside, carrying a small toolkit. His movements were calm and respectful, his voice soft-spoken. There was an unfamiliar energy in the room now, not tension, just presence. For days, Clara had felt invisible, but suddenly she was being seen. As Eli examined the faucet, Clara stood nearby, awkwardly. She felt almost foolish for calling him over something so minor. The truth was, the sink could have waited. What couldn't wait was the emptiness she'd been drowning in. She wanted to say something, anything to fill the silence. "Would you like some tea?" she asked finally. He looked up, smiled politely, and said, "Yes, please. Thank you." Clara went to the kitchen, her heart oddly restless. She filled the kettle, trying to make sense of what she was feeling. It wasn't attraction, it was attention. It had been a long time since anyone had simply looked her in the eye and listened. As she poured the tea into 2 cups, she noticed her reflection in the glass door. She looked tired, older somehow. But there was still warmth in her eyes, hidden behind years of quiet neglect. When she returned to the living room, Eli had finished checking the sink. "It wasn't much," he said. "Just a loose seal. I tightened it. Should be fine now." He wiped his hands and smiled again, ready to leave. For a moment, Clara panicked. She didn't want the silence to return. "Wait," she said quickly. "You can sit for a while. The rain's still heavy outside. Let it slow down a bit." He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure," he said, sitting down on the edge of the couch. Clara placed the cup of tea in front of him. "Thanks," he said quietly, taking a sip. There was something peaceful about the way he spoke, no arrogance, no assumptions, just calm, trying to lighten the awkwardness. Clara smiled faintly. "You must be tired, working all day." "Sometimes," Eli replied. "But it's good work. Honest work. Keeps me going." Clara nodded. "You're not from around here, are you?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. I came from Ghana 3 years ago. My mother's still there. I send her money every month." Something softened inside Clara. The way he spoke about his mother, warmly, proudly, reminded her of what kindness sounded like. They talked for a few minutes about simple things, the weather, the city, his work. The conversation wasn't deep, but it felt human, and that alone was rare in her world. As she stood up to put away the cups, she stumbled slightly. A faint twinge shot through her ankle. "Oh," she gasped, steadying herself on the table. Eli immediately stood up. "Are you okay?" "It's nothing," she said, embarrassed. "Just a little sprain, I think." "Here, sit down," he said kindly, guiding her to the sofa. His hand was gentle, steady, nothing inappropriate, just helpful. Yet, for Clara, that small act of care felt unfamiliar, almost foreign. For a moment, she looked up at him, and in his eyes, she saw something pure, concern, not curiosity. She realized how long it had been since someone had cared enough to ask if she was all right. Her heart ached, not for him, but for the version of herself who used to feel loved. Eli smiled softly. "You should rest that leg, ma'am." "Thank you, Eli," she said quietly. He nodded, packed his tools, and stood by the door. "I'll send the invoice later," he said politely. "All right," she replied. "And, thank you again. For everything." He smiled one last time. "Take care of yourself, ma'am." When the door closed behind him, the silence returned, but it was different now. The ticking of the clock no longer sounded as heavy. Clara sat still for a long moment, the rain still falling outside. She didn't know exactly what had just happened, but something inside her had shifted. It wasn't desire. It was awareness, of how lonely she had become, and how easily attention could fill the cracks that love had once sealed. Would you like me to continue with part 2, The Unexpected Connection, next, in the same cinematic and faceless storytelling tone? The morning at the office passed slower than usual. Michael tried to focus on his presentation slides, but his thoughts kept wandering back home. He texted Laura once around 10 a.m., asking, "Everything okay at the clinic?" She didn't reply right away, and when she finally did, it was short, "All good. Heading back soon." Something about that message felt distant. Maybe it was the brevity, or maybe it was the lack of her usual smiley face at the end. He brushed the feeling away, reminding himself she wasn't feeling well. By noon, the meeting he'd been preparing for was suddenly postponed. His manager called it off because the visiting clients had been delayed. With half a day unexpectedly free, Michael packed his laptop and decided to head home. He told himself it was just to check on Laura, but deep down, there was another reason, one he didn't want to name. The rain had stopped, leaving the city covered in a silver mist. As he drove through the narrow streets leading back to his neighborhood, he felt a strange mix of calm and restlessness. The wipers squeaked once before he turned them off. The radio played a soft instrumental tune that only made his thoughts louder. He passed the familiar landmarks, the bakery at the corner, the small park where Laura liked to walk, the bookstore where they'd once spent a rainy afternoon together. Life had been simpler then, he thought. They used to talk more, laugh more. But lately, silence had grown between them like an invisible wall neither of them wanted to climb. At a red light, he caught himself thinking about Ethan, the friendly neighbor who always offered help before you asked. Michael admired his reliability, but lately, he'd noticed how often Ethan stopped by. Sometimes to borrow a tool, sometimes just to chat. And once or twice, Michael had come home early to find Ethan already in their garden, helping Laura fix something. He never thought much of it, until now. He shook his head, feeling foolish for even letting such thoughts in. "It's just a ride to the doctor," he muttered under his breath. Then, as he turned onto the main road leading toward home, something caught his eye. A dark blue sedan was parked by the side of a small cafe, a place called the Willow Bean, a quiet spot that Laura loved but rarely visited without him. He slowed down instinctively. The car looked familiar. It took only a second to recognize it. Ethan car. First, he told himself it couldn't mean anything. Maybe Ethan had stopped for coffee after dropping Laura off. Maybe he was waiting for someone. He almost drove past, but curiosity, the kind that creeps in quietly and refuses to leave, made him stop a few meters ahead. Through the rain-speckled window of the cafe, he saw two people sitting inside. His heart started to pound harder. Ethan was there, his back toward the glass, and across from him sat Laura. She wasn't in her coat anymore, her scarf resting on the chair. She looked different. Relaxed. Smiling in a way Michael hadn't seen in weeks. They were talking, no physical closeness, no suspicious gestures, just talking. But their expressions carried something unspoken, something that twisted in Michael's chest like a knot he couldn't untie. Ethan leaned forward, said something, and Laura laughed softly, touching her hair in that familiar nervous way she did when she felt understood. Michael stayed there, hands gripping the steering wheel, the world suddenly silent except for his heartbeat. It wasn't what he saw, it was what he felt. A sudden ache, sharp and deep, not from anger but from realization. He looked away. For a moment, he considered walking in, pretending to be surprised, saying he'd just been passing by. But something stopped him. Maybe it was pride. Maybe fear of what he'd hear if he asked questions he wasn't ready to face. Instead, he started the car again and drove off slowly. The cafe's reflection faded in his rearview mirror, swallowed by the mist. He didn't go home. Not right away. He parked by the small park near the river, the same place where he and Laura used to sit years ago, back when they still talked about dreams and plans. The benches were wet from rain, the air smelled of damp leaves and silence. He sat there for nearly an hour, staring at the water. His thoughts played in loops, fragments of moments, words, and gestures that suddenly felt different in memory. Ethan's laughter at the last neighborhood barbecue. Laura's faint smile when Ethan stopped by to fix the backlight. Her occasional hesitation when Michael mentioned Ethan's name. Were those signs? Or was he only stitching together coincidences to feed his doubt? A part of him wanted to believe it was all innocent, a friendly gesture, a coincidence, a misunderstanding. But another part of him, the one that had been quietly watching all along, whispered that something between them had already changed. Maybe not in action, but in feeling. When the church bell nearby struck 4, Michael finally started the car again. The rain began to fall once more, light, cold, rhythmic. The world outside his window blurred into gray. By the time he reached home, Ethan's car was gone. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that hides everything. Laura was in the kitchen, standing by the counter, pouring herself a glass of water. She turned when she heard him, a little surprised. "You're home early," she said, her voice calm. "Meeting got cancelled," he replied, hanging his coat. "How are you feeling now?" "Better," she said, smiling faintly. "Dr. Parker said it's just fatigue. He gave me some vitamins." Her tone was casual, natural, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of hesitation, like a curtain briefly moving in a breeze. Michael caught it but said nothing. "That's good," he said simply. He walked over to the fridge, pretending to look for something while she turned away. Dinner was quiet that night. The TV played softly in the background, a sitcom laugh track filling the spaces between their words. They talked about trivial things, groceries, work, the weather, but neither mentioned the cafe, or Ethan, or the long hours of the day that had gone missing between her leaving home and coming back. When they finally went to bed, Laura fell asleep quickly. Michael lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint rhythm of her breathing. He wanted to believe her, to erase what he'd seen, to tell himself it was nothing more than a misunderstanding. But the image of them in the cafe, the ease in her smile, the comfort in their silence, refused to fade. Outside, the rain continued to fall, gentle and endless, and as Michael closed his eyes, one thought echoed quietly in his mind, heavier than any spoken word. Sometimes silence speaks louder than betrayal itself. The next morning, Ethan woke to the soft glow of sunlight filtering through the curtains. He stretched and yawned, feeling both rested and slightly anxious about what the day might bring. Vanessa had already started preparing breakfast when he stepped into the kitchen. The smell of fresh bread and brewed coffee filled the room, making the space feel even warmer and more inviting. "Good morning, Ethan," Vanessa said with a smile, her voice calm and comforting. "Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," he replied, returning her smile, a little shyly. He noticed the gentle way she moved around the kitchen, the ease with which she handled the pans and dishes, and couldn't help but admire her grace. Vanessa caught his gaze and looked away quickly, a faint blush coloring her cheeks, as though she, too, felt the subtle electricity that lingered between them. Breakfast was a quiet, comfortable affair. They shared stories of their childhoods, their hobbies, and their dreams. Ethan laughed more freely than he had the day before, encouraged by Vanessa's easy warmth. Vanessa, in turn, found herself fascinated by his curiosity, the way he noticed small details, and the earnest way he asked questions. Each passing moment seemed to draw them closer, their conversations weaving a delicate thread of connection. After breakfast, Vanessa suggested showing Ethan the town. "There are a few places you might like to see," she said. "The park, the library, and the little market down the street." Ethan agreed eagerly, and they set out together. The walk was leisurely, giving them the chance to talk and share quiet smiles. Sometimes their hands brushed against each other by accident, sending small shocks of awareness through them both. Each touch lingered just a moment too long, yet neither said anything. At the park, Ethan watched Vanessa interact with people they passed, neighbors, shopkeepers, and even a few children. Her kindness and confidence impressed him, and he felt a mixture of admiration and a strange, unfamiliar longing. Vanessa noticed his gaze and felt her own pulse quicken slightly, aware of the subtle attraction growing between them. She told herself it was nothing, just the natural warmth of companionship, yet she couldn't ignore the way her thoughts lingered on him after each shared smile or word. In the late afternoon, rain began to fall softly, sending them both running for shelter under the awning of a small cafe. Inside, they ordered hot drinks and found a quiet corner, the cozy atmosphere amplifying the closeness they already felt. The sound of rain tapping against the windows created a rhythmic backdrop, almost like a heartbeat that matched the tension in the room. They sat side by side, their knees occasionally brushing, a warmth spreading through them that neither fully understood. Vanessa suggested they play a board game she kept on a nearby shelf, just to pass the time. Ethan agreed, and as they played, their laughter filled the room. Occasionally, Vanessa would reach across the board to move a piece, their hands briefly touching. Each touch sent a small jolt of awareness through both of them, and the room seemed charged with a quiet energy. Ethan's eyes met hers, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. He wanted to say something, anything, to acknowledge the feeling, but words failed him. Vanessa felt the same hesitation, caught between restraint and desire. As the rain slowed, they returned home, dripping slightly from the remaining drops. Vanessa suggested drying off with warm towels, and the simple act of helping each other brought a new closeness. Ethan's hand brushed Vanessa's as she handed him a towel, and they both lingered just a second too long, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The small gestures, the shared smiles, and the easy comfort of one another's presence had woven a tension that neither could deny. Evening came, and they found themselves in the living room once more, sitting near the fireplace. The flames flickered, casting shadows on the walls, and the warmth of the fire seemed to echo the warmth growing between them. Vanessa offered Ethan a blanket, draping it over his shoulders, and their fingers brushed as she adjusted it. Both of them felt the jolt of electricity, a mix of curiosity and desire that neither wanted to name out loud. Vanessa suggested a quiet moment, just sitting together, listening to music, letting the day's conversation settle. Ethan leaned back, feeling the comfort of her presence, and Vanessa felt a protective warmth toward him that was complicated by a new, unexpected attraction. They sat in silence, yet it was a silence filled with unspoken words, glances, and gentle movements that deepened the emotional intimacy. As the night deepened, Vanessa showed Ethan to his room again. He paused at the doorway, looking back at her with a mixture of admiration and something unspoken. "Good night, Vanessa," he said softly. "Good night, Ethan," she replied, her voice carrying the faint tremor of emotions she tried to hide. Alone, both of them reflected on the day, the laughter, the closeness, and the subtle touches that lingered in their memories. The attraction was undeniable, yet wrapped in the comfort of trust and care, creating a tension that neither wanted to confront too soon. The room was quiet, but both hearts were full of thoughts and feelings that promised a night of emotional awakening yet to come.